Good morning everybody, unless of course you're watching this video in the evening. In that case, good evening, you're watching Time Travel TV, and today we're going to be talking about the trial of King Charles I. Now, first we need to fill in some gaps, because I remember in the Civil War video I did, we missed the bit between the First and Second Civil War. So first of all, we'll fill that in. So after the First Civil War, King Charles was surrendered to the Scots and he went to Scotland. And what happened is that Parliament split into two groups, the Independent and Presbyterian, also known as the Peace and War. They would give the king several agreements. So what do you think of this, for instance, of how things would look? The first to do this was the Presbyterians, who gave him the Newcastle proposition, which was fairly lenient, and the king probably should have accepted it, but he just ignored it, which was a bit silly of him, wasn't it? Then the Independents gave him a proposition called the Heads Proposal, and he ignored that as well. He still should have accepted the Newcastle proposition, but he probably, I mean, as like an alternative, he probably should have said the second one. Then, it's important to remember also that at this time there was many radical groups coming around, like the Levellers, the Diggers, the Fifth Monarchists, and others sort of similar ones. Especially in the army, and these were anti-authoritarians, like the world's first communists, if you know what I mean, setting up communes and things, and they gave the king a proposition called the Agreement of the People. Also the king ignored that as well, by the way. I'm not going to dwell too much on the radicals, because their significance in history has been, well, exaggerated over time, mainly because people were frightened of them because they came up with such radical ideas, which is why they're called the radicals. But anyway, at the time, they were having something called the Putney debates with the grandees of a new model army. That's like Ireton and Cromwell and company. And they were basically putting to them what their demands were, because people didn't really understand it. They said, oh, what do you want? What do you want? And they were putting their demands to the grandees of the new model army in the Putney debates when King Charles escaped. And the Second Civil War started. And we've already talked about the Second Civil War in my Civil War video. If you want to know about that, go and see the Civil War video. Anyway, suffice to say the king lost. And it all started all over again. Well, not quite, actually, because the new model army held something called the Windsor Prayer Meeting at Windsor Castle. And they said, that man of blood, they said, King Charles, he needs to be cut down to size, which is a surprisingly good expression considering what they did to him. Anyway, the Parliament was still fairly keen on trying to negotiate, so they did the negotiations of Newport, which, suffice to say, didn't go very well. So they put the king on trial, and many people say, oh, well, it was a show trial, or, oh, the king was guilty, or, oh, the king should be found innocent, he didn't really do any of that. Well, to be honest, whatever you think, it doesn't really matter. You can think what you like, because it doesn't really matter what the truth was about that, because the outcome was still the same. He was sentenced to death and executed, and he had his head cut off, which is why being cut down to size is a surprisingly appropriate expression for the time. Anyway, then we had an interim period where there was no king or queen, for fact, at all, and we did a little experiment with something called a republic. Now, that didn't go particularly well, but we will talk about that on a future video, because that's a whole different subject. I mean, welcome to Cromwell land with that. So, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please subscribe to Time Travel TV, and I shall see you next time. Cheerio.